Hey guys, it's Sable, finally back on the channel, this time to talk about a new concept that we didn't explore here, which is 3D games. This is going to be a code through series, pretty much like the starter series. The difference between a tutorial series and a code through series is how it is structured and the main intention behind it. In a code through series, my main intention is to show you how the coding and the making of that game is going to happen, all the way from the beginning to whenever I stop. Why a tutorial series is more like choosing the key points which are going to be important for you to grasp and follow. And so far, I do feel like people prefer code through theories a little bit more than tutorial. So as you can see in the background, which is a prototype I made in order to see if this series would be good or not, we will be making a Minecraft-like game, but more specifically, we will be making a Skyblock game. For those who don't know what a Skyblock is, that's just a Minecraft mod pack, which is not relying on the idea of having a pre-built world, and instead you kind of start in the void and build your world little by little. So let's start simply by creating a new project. Here I do want to have this project in my Godot folder with all the other ones, and this is going to be Skyblock code through. As for the rendering, I will use Forward Plus as I really don't expect this game to be played on mobile, and I want to use computer controls. I will also take a few minutes to set up a basic version control by using Git Kraken as usual. So I'm just going to start a local repository, which is going to be Skyblock code through with a master branch. Just changing my comments a little bit because I do like emojis, and we are good to go. So here is our empty project. And what we want to do very first is just set up the basic settings we would want for this project. For this one, I will not touch the default settings of the project. However, I will change the debug settings for the GD script by adding a few warnings, because I do like to have those warnings around. I'm taking a few seconds to show you one thing in the editor settings. You can go look for the type hints in completion. If you do want to have your built-in functions to be coming with the returning type when you autocomplete. So this way you know why I do have type when I use built-in functions. So for this first episode, I was thinking that, well, actually no, it wasn't me. I was hesitating between a character and a block. And the vote from the community decided that you guys want to see how to make a block. So let's start by just creating a world. We will just create a simple 3D node, which we will rename world, and we will start saving it and creating a little bit of structure by creating a scenes folder where I will have a world folder and my world scene. Let's have this yellow, and this node right there is going to represent the container of the world, including the blocks, the characters, etc., etc. By default, if I just run the scene like this, it does absolutely nothing. We don't see anything but a gray background. why if we do watch the editor here, we do have a kind of a sky and a ground or a void. Those two elements, well, they come from the environment and from the sunlight. So if we do turn those things off, we do actually see that in game if we ignore the grid. So the very first thing we will do is simply add those two elements within our world, if that makes sense. So there's this built-in function which allows us to edit the environment and what the sun is acting like. So they also provide us the ability to add those things to the scene like this. So now those things exist within the world. However, if we do run the scene again, we still have nothing. The problem here is that we are lacking the eyes of our game. Well, a camera, basically. So Godot is set in a way that there's a viewport by default, which is, well, this rectangle here. And it shows user interfaces, of course, but when you want to use 3D or 2D rendering, you do need to add the camera, which will act as the eyes, and basically to say what portion of the world we should display in the viewport. Godot works with a system that makes it use only one camera at a time. So you want to be sure that you have only one camera active, and I do believe that if you do have a second camera active, it's just not going to work. I actually never tried, since it's not what you want to do, or maybe for very specific reasons that I'm not aware of. But anyway, we're just going to create a camera 3D in this scene, which is represented here, so we can see the angle which is being watched, viewed by those eyes. So if we run that scene, we do now have access to the sky and the void under it. Okay. So we kind of have a working playground to make our block. So technically, we could just create a very simple block just by using a built-in node, which is the CSG node. We have different types, and we could use the box one, which is right there. So technically, if we do run the scene right now, we're not going to see much because the camera is within that block. But if we do take the camera and move it just behind the block or in front of the block, we will now be able to actually see the block in our world. However, we will not be using those CSGBox3D, because if we open the documentation of this node, Godot explicitly says that it is intended to be used for level prototyping, and they have a significant CPU cost compared to creating Mesh Instance 3D and other things. So what we will do is just ignore that and delete this block and create an efficient block that will be better for us, since we will have more control regarding how it's going to behave, and yeah, it's going to be more resource efficient as well. So we will just create a new scene, and in there we want to create a new 3D node. So technically, any 3D node will work, right? So here it is a default 3D node, but we do want something with a little bit more properties and functionalities and features. Those will be the static body 3D. According to Godot, it is a 3D physics body that can't be moved by external forces. When it is moved manually, it doesn't affect other bodies in its path. So it's exactly what we do want for the blocks. Okay, so to make it simple. When the player is colliding with the block by running into a block, we don't want that block to move backward. We want that block to be static, and we want the player to just not move further. So that's why we choose this static body. The other one is they are different body, but the other one we will use otherwise is the character body 3D. So here, let's take this body and rename our scene block. We're gonna save that scene in its own. What am I doing? We'll save it in its block folder. Save that. And now we are ready to make that block exist. So first we do have a warning, which is just saying that this block has no collision. I will choose to ignore that at the moment, and yep. So what we do want very first is our block to exist visually in the world, because right now there's nothing. So what we will use, because we have a lot of 3D nodes to choose from, we will use a mesh instant 3D, which just instances meshes. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm not like a huge artist and everything, so I can't tell you the exact definition of what a mesh is. To me, meshes are just like geometrical things that you do represent in 2D or 3D world. So yeah, meshes are whatever you will use to create geometrical objects with textures on them. So here we could use the box mesh. That would make a lot of sense. However, I will choose not to use that for a reason, a texture reason, basically. The blocks, I want them to be pixel perfect. So the texture that I apply to the block, I basically want to make a texture for this side, one for this side, one for this side, etc., etc. So if I do have only a block like this, so maybe there's a way to make sure that this, let's say 16 pixel by 16 pixel texture applies properly on each side. Well, first of all, I don't know how to do that. And second of all, it doesn't support the ability to make a block with different faces, right? So for example, if you think about Minecraft, the tree, the log block, has a different face on the top and bottom as it has on the sides. So this is why I prefer to instead have separated faces, which are not only one cube, but instead for what they call quad mesh, basically, which is 4 rectangles. So making that with plane is perfectly okay. However, I will just use, create the collision right now by creating a collision shape 3D, just in order to have an outline. Because when we create that collision shape 3D and assign to it a box shape, we now have an outline of what the box looks like, so we can just apply the textures on it. So let's create new mesh instant 3Ds and create this, for example, as the east face. I believe it's the east face, the first one. So here we will use for this instance a quad mesh. So as you can see, there's a side with the texture and a side with no texture. So we want to make sure that the texture is on the outside of the block and not the inside. We just have to bring this with Control and Shift to match the blueprint of that block. All right, so now I'm going to duplicate this And I will just move it, rotate it, and have it on the south face. Did I? Okay, I didn't want to move it this way. It's all right. Okay, and here we have the south face. And I will basically do that for every side. Here is our block, and as you can see here, I decided that this would be the east. This is just an arbitrary, that's a difficult word. I decided that the positive x is going to be the north. So since this is north, well, this has to be east. It's that simple. But I decided that you can choose whatever coordinate system you do prefer. Now that we have this block scene being created and we actually now have the collision shape added to it, we can just go back to our world and bring in our block scene within the world, so it will appear in the middle just like the CSG block existed. So this is how we create a block, basically. Now, what we want to see is how do we actually, well, create more blocks. It's actually very easy. We just duplicate those and we move them by using Control so that they, snap to the grid. Well, there's no grid per se, but when you use Control, you move things by 1 unit at a time. Since our block have 1 unit width, well, there it is. Now again, we can move the camera and just have it on top and have it look down, so we would see exactly what this would look like in the game. We do have a few blocks. So what do we do with that? Here the blocks are white, so what we want to do is add textures to those blocks. So to finish this episode, the first episode, we will see how to make a pixel perfect texture for those blocks. So I do like to use Gimp, whatever, to make my images. So here I will just create a new file, which is going to be 16 by 16 pixels. This will represent one face for a block. I find it very good to often, I often find it good to go look for color palettes on the web to have more precise ideas of what a color should look like and what you're looking for. For example, here I'm looking for the dirt color palette, and there are indeed some interesting colors in there which I will try to use. Soil color palette, that's great. However, I would have preferred the hexadecimals, but I think it's okay because I probably can just use the color picker. So from there, I will use the color picker to pick the first color, which is going to be the darkest brown. This will be the background of my dirt. I will use a pencil size 1 to make some details. So I'm not gonna lie. Those details, I very often go randomly, right? I do make some random lines, and I try to, well, I'm not a graphist, right? So you will have to be taking this for what it is. I do like to add a kind of gray tint inside it. So here we do have a gray tint on this color palette. It's grayish, but yeah. All right. So it's kind of random. Maybe some black spots. I will take this color a little bit and make it slightly darker. to have some darker spots. Okay, so that will be our dirt texture. This dirt texture, I will export it as a PNG file in my project. So here in my project, I will actually create a folder, assets, okay, and textures. There I will store all the textures. And this will be dirt.png. I usually choose to save everything when I export, and now we just have to go back to Godot and find the assets. I will color this red, and here is the dirt.png. There are a few settings that we can change when we do use the import tab in there, and there are two which are very important in my opinion. They are the compress mode to lossless and the 3D compression to, again, disabled, lossless, sort of, to make sure that this texture is pixel perfect for every block, and we don't want it to blur what it looks like. So now let's go to our block. We have this property here, which is the surface material override. So this will basically change the white texture to something different. So we will just create a new standard material 3D. So it's slightly the same, except that now we have access to all those properties. So it's a lot. I don't know what they all do. I just know the one which are important. The most important one is definitely albedo. Albedo is like the solid color or texture that you do apply to your space. So here, that texture, we can load this dirt, and here is what it looks like. It's not that good because we do still need to make a few tweaks. The first one is in sampling. Yep. We want to change the linear map to nearest. So I don't really make the difference between all the three nearest, but basically nearest is what you want to have a pixel perfect thing. Now what we can do with this material that we created is just save it in its own file, which will be in the assets, and here we will create materials, and that will be the dirt material. Now that this material exists, we can assign it to all the faces of this block. There we go. Here is what the block looks like. So by default, Godot comes in with roughness and metallic aspects to their materials, which make that kind of reflective veil on top of the block. You may have seen that on the prototype at the very beginning of the video. So you can basically get rid of it by setting roughness and metallic to 0. So now we do have a very pixel perfect and color fidelity. We will say yes. And that's pretty much it. Because we have edited this block here in this file, the ones which are in the world are also being edited. The reason for this is because there's only one setting for our block yet. So technically, if we put that differently, we can only create dirt block. We will see in a later episode how we can make it so that we have different types of blocks and that we can choose what block would you want to create. Alright, that's it for this first episode of this code through series about Skyblock. I hope you liked it because it's been a long time I didn't make videos. I don't want to say I'm kind of rusty, but yeah, it feels weird. So yeah, I do hope you liked it. If you did, think about doing all the YouTube algorithm things, because also I'm kind of foreshadowing something which may happen with this series, which is that some episodes which I judge as non-mandatory episodes will probably be channel members only, because I do have to think about how to monetize the channel to get something back from it, because if I don't, at some point I will have to step away from YouTube. So in order to not do that, I will have to think about those monetizing things a little bit better. So by the way, if you do want to support the channel and do like the content here, well, think about turning on the ads, becoming a member when that will be available again, and always we do have a coffee link as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching it this far, and I will see you in a next episode where we will be creating a stone block and where we will see how to create either dirt block or stone blocks.